What is up, everybody? Welcome to another Sunday Trialogue. I am joined by my co-host, Ethan Indigo Smith. Ethan, tell them where they can find you.
Peace, everybody. Peace, Headless. Always great to be here. And I'm easy to find on all the social media. Ethan Indigo Smith, um, on the usual suspects, and a bunch of writing out there. If you look into that too, many of my recent articles on Occult Research Institute, or I should say all, practically all, and yeah, easy to find on Amazon. I got a few books out there too, and always appreciate being here.
Well, it's always good to have you. You know where you can find me. You're watching me now. So just share this stream out, get it to your friends, get it to everybody else. We're going to be doing deep dives into a bunch of different subjects today. But I wanted to start her off with a little video I saw about the Basque people. Oh, there's Flower. Look at these faithful viewers. Welcome back, Flower. So if you haven't heard of the Basque, this one is a pretty quick rundown, about 5-minute rundown of exactly who they are, what they are, and the mystery surrounding them. So we can just play this and maybe stop it when we have questions or have comments.
Somewhere in the mountains between France and Spain lives a people who do not fit, not linguistically, not genetically, not historically. They speak a language with no known relatives on Earth. Their blood tells a story no other European population tells. And for centuries, every explanation offered for who they really were turned out to be wrong. I first came across the Basques while researching something else entirely, stumbled into the linguistic rabbit hole, and genuinely could not find my way back out. The DNA findings that finally answered the question didn't simplify anything. They made it stranger. Start with the simplest version of the problem. Every language spoken in Europe today, French, German, Russian, Greek, Hindi, if you trace it back far enough, descends from a single ancestral tongue, Proto-Indo-European. A language spoken somewhere on the Eurasian steppe thousands of years ago that spread, fragmented, and eventually became the entire linguistic landscape of a continent. Every language except one. Euskera, the Basque language, does not belong to that family. It does not belong to any family. It stands completely alone, with no known relatives living or dead, no ancestor language that linguists can identify, no connection to anything else that has ever been spoken on this
language
planet.
isolate.
That is not a small anomaly. That is a linguistic impossibility that somehow kept happening anyway. The details make it stranger. Euskera contains no meaningful Latin borrowings, despite the Romans occupying the region for centuries and absorbing virtually every other culture they touched. Its counting system runs in base 20 rather than base 10, suggesting a mathematical framework that developed in complete isolation from the numerical thinking that organized the rest of the ancient world. And certain Basque words, aits for rock, for water, su for fire, are so structurally primitive that linguists believe they may represent some of the oldest surviving vocabulary in any living human language. I spent an afternoon once trying to learn basic Basque phrases before a trip through the Pyrenees. 10 minutes in, I genuinely wondered if I was reading the page correctly. It does not yield. It does not offer handholds. Nothing about it reminds you of anything you already know. That experience, frustrating as it was, turned out to be the first real clue. A language that resists everyone for a reason. And that reason, it turns out, runs deeper than linguistics. The linguistic mystery was strange enough. Then scientists looked at the blood, and the argument got considerably more complicated. In the 1940s, medical researchers studying Basque populations made a discovery that nobody had a clean explanation for. The Basques carried the highest concentration of Rh negative blood of any population on Earth. Depending on the specific community studied, the figure ran as high as 47%. The European average sits around 15%. They also showed unusually high rates of type O blood, creating a combined genetic profile that had no real parallel anywhere else on the continent. Here is why that mattered beyond the purely medical. Rh negative blood frequency is not stable across mixing populations. When distinct populations intermarry and integrate over generations, Rh negative rates tend to drop toward a regional mean. The fact that Basque populations had held these concentrations so far above everything around them pointed in one direction only. They had not been mixing, not recently, and possibly not for a very long time. What the blood studies could not tell you was why. Two competing theories immediately emerged and immediately stalled. Either the Basques were the remnant descendants of Europe's original pre-agricultural hunter-gatherers, a population that had occupied the continent before farming arrived and simply never absorbed the waves of newcomers that followed. Or they were migrants from somewhere unknown, arriving in the Pyrenees from an origin point that left no obvious trace, becoming isolated after the fact rather than before it. Both arguments had something going for them. Neither had enough evidence to close the debate. The tools required to settle it simply did not exist yet. For decades, the Basques remained exactly what they had always been, a question that kept returning, an answer that kept retreating. Then the age of ancient DNA arrived, and everything changed direction at once. In 2021, an international team led by Dr. David Comas at the University of Barcelona published what remains the most comprehensive genetic analysis of Basque populations ever conducted. 600,000 genetic markers. 200 Basque.
So yeah, what do you think of that? That was just a short video, but
It's really interesting. I mean, the biological distinction is, the final kind of point of interest, but even the whole language and culture and the retaining of that kind of isolation, if you will, through modernity is pretty amazing. Although mountains can do that, right? I mean, who knows where they're from and what have you and so on, but like a mountain, geography will keep people away for one thing, and definitely keep people in there.
it's so funny because there's so many different invasions and occupations and all the rest of that stuff going on in just that region, that for them to remain distinctive even over all that amount of time is just incredible to me. And those mysteries just persist. There's the idea of the the first invasion that we can really comment on from a classical perspective would be the what are they called, the Canaanite Phoenicians, right? So they established themselves all over the coasts across that region. And so you've got Cartagena, which is just Spanish for Carthage, and a lot of other cities that are just sort of Canaanite Phoenician. Also, you had what's his name? That conquering dude. I always blank on his name, but the guy who went across the mountains into Rome with elephants. He had a bunch of holdings there. Hannibal, there we go. Hannibal had a bunch of holdings in Spain. And in fact, that's how the Romans beat them, is by going over to Spain and sacking all of their holdings. So then you've got the Roman invasion, and then you've got all the rest of these invasions, all the way up to the Muslim invasions, and they're still distinct. And so
yeah, good
point. I had a quick, if you want to hear the language, here we go. This is a Basque song.
Nothing yet.
It sounds a lot like Spanish, though.
I didn't hear anything. I don't know if anyone else heard anything.
Horitxarrean bizati,
There it is.
baina itxasoak elkartzen gaitu, lehen orain eta beti.
The Basque Country is a cultural island. The French in the north, the Spanish in the south, they're Latin. And the Basque, originally, we're not Latin. That makes us different. Nobody is able to tell us, what's going on with our origins.
You can kind of see
In the
all
Basque
that
Country, there are lots of
cultural
mountains. The
influence
farming
that they
has
had
always
on
been very
stage.
small, and the big richness of the Basque Country has been the ocean, the sea. You see, boat building was the most important activities for Basque for many centuries, and this activity has disappeared. That's why we created Albaola Society. The purpose of this place is to preserve Basque maritime heritage and also to restore and build replicas of historical boats.
Txalupa zahar bat bere zulo eta guzi, ikusi eta badaukagu zer ikasi. Gero aldian ere nahi badugu bizi, zer izan ginen jakin behar da lehenbizi.
We always try to create awareness about our activities, and we said, well, let's get in touch with a bertsolari. It's like improvised poetry.
Kontatzen badakienez nago seguru,
Jon hau beti izan da nahiko txoriburu.
You hear the Spanish in there,
Zebero
right?
ta ze Kristo ondo pasa dugu. Zebero ta ze Kristo ondo pasa dugu.
The storytellers, the bertsolaris, will talk about any subject under very strict rules of rhythm and metrics. It goes back and forth. One bertsolari, he says something, and then the other one, will answer to him right away. It is very, very popular, and which is amazing is how good they are, and it's fantastic. How they can. I mean, I would define the bertsolaris as something magical, something really magical. It's amazing. It depends on us to take care of our identity. Our main axe is our language. Our language is what makes us Basque. And then, together with the language, there are many, many aspects. Like the one we care about is maritime. I think even more mysterious than our origin is, how we have survived as a cultural identity, in such a strategical geographical place.
Euskal Herria herri zar bat da, herri zarrenen neurriko. Milaka urteko hizkuntza bat du, bere bihotzean tinko. Inoiz zalantza izaten dugu, gero ez aldan biziko. Baina kantatzen duen herri bat, inoiz ere ez da hilko.
Very interesting final line there. The culture that sings will never die out.
It reminds me of actually two distinct cultures in the Americas, South America. The Mapuche in Chile are said to be essentially the only unconquered tribe that maintained their independence into modernity from the Spanish. So they are a mountainous tribe too, and of course Chile is very much like California in the North Americas, of course, where it's like coast, valley, mountain. So very, very interesting geography, maybe similar to the Basque. And there's also the Kogi or Koji in Colombia, and there's a great movie about them. They also are all about this mountainous environment that does also touch the coast. And they a beautiful people. There's like one or two documentaries about them, and they're very isolated still to this day and do not welcome outsiders. But they will seasonally go up and down the mountainside, farming and foraging with the seasonal flow of the elevational changes and so forth. Pretty beautiful people. But both of them kind of maintained their independence, if you will. Maybe the Koji a little bit less so, or remarkably in a sense that they didn't have to fight too much, where the Mapuche actually did fight. Maybe the Koji were just kind of remote, and so they didn't have to fight. But it just reminds me of these kind of cultural circumstances and geographical circumstances.
Right. Well, I think it really does bring up the idea that maybe culture is a series of micro decisions. And if you don't have that sort of spiritual connection to those roots, that all of those micro decisions get thrown off. And
Well,
you see that with loss.
That goes to your point on the subject of perfidy, right? Because the tendency for people to be inauthentic and or even proverbially or literally sell out their people, I think that's how culture just kind of becomes monolithic, right?
Right. It becomes a heterogeneous monolith. Right. So
Right.
any sort of distinction gets swallowed up. And we could see these waves of different ideas sort of dominating in the culture where, let's say in 2015, 2016, it was everybody needs to, take a step back and be more inviting to everybody. Well, at the same time, they're banning everybody off of social media for having anything that is in opposition to that ideal. And so it really comes down to this. I think the most profitable venture in history is displacing native populations. So any empire that is displacing native populations and then assimilating and doing all the rest of this stuff is going to, eventually take the resources and all the rest of that stuff. And
yeah, it's interesting. It goes to an actualization of this perversion of doing wrong to eventually say you're doing good.
Right.
To act like you're doing good, but it's really just off of the wrong that particular institution or even individual may have started, which is amazing. How that happens all the time.
It's amazing how full the circle goes, because if we take a step back and actually look at things from an objective standpoint, from the perspective of science, from the perspective of culture, from all of these other factors, you could see, hey, when you've introduced these ideas that water down and destroy those cultures, that's usually at the behest of somebody who wants to displace the native population and move in and profit from what they created. And so maybe the Bosque weren't as profitable to displace, and maybe they had a lot more cultural integrity when it comes to that stuff. But I think it's a very potent topic when we're talking about things like AI and talking about technology and talking about information, because at the same time as it's a powerful tool, who is it a powerful tool for? And so right now I kind of feel like we're in this sort of cycle where they're using these Bronze Age superstitions to bring about Skynet. And so the native displacement has to go into hyperdrive so that people feel more connected to the machines than their own roots. And so that machine displacement of human culture is really taking effect. And the purpose of songs, again, he finished off with that line, a people who sing cannot go away. Well, where's our songs? Where's our cultural touchstones that can be transferred over time and rhythm through future generations? Where are those things? Well, they're offensive, so we got to get rid of them. Who's offended by this? That's the real question. Who's being offended? And it's funny, in England right now, we're seeing the same thing where it's like, you're guilty of offensive speech. To who? What are you talking about? Why is somebody else being offended more offensive than my offense that they're being offended? But
yeah, it's the thought police. It's literally thought police trying to mediate and instigate problems by way of the mediation, huh?
And every single time, it's always heavily weighted in one direction, right? You can't be offended at somebody else being offended. That offended party is obviously the more offended person because we've weighted our system to do that. And so we've got people going to jail for years for making offensive comments. And it's some of the most benign comments you could imagine. One guy was talking about a new brand of car, and he said, "This is disgusting. We don't want this. This is terrible." And he's going to jail for 6 months for being offensive. This is in England. One of the very first examples of offensive speech, putting the guy in jail, was over a car. He was commenting on Facebook on this post about a car.
Because it was owned by a certain someone or manufactured by a certain someone?
I think it was a BMW. He just didn't like the model. But the idea was that he was being offensive, and they wanted to broaden out the basis for creating these new speech laws. So they went for the guy talking about how he didn't like a car first to get as broad as possible of an interpretation of the law to include anybody from a critic on a car to somebody saying, "Hey, I don't like the fact that, my children are being kidnapped by grooming gangs," so that spectrum.
The big one right now, or I don't know if it's big, but it seems the more obtuse anyway, or frequent anyway, I mean to say, is being supportive, announcing support of Palestine in the UK.
Right.
Is like,
it depends. Which group are you announcing your support from? So if you are doing it from a Muslim group,
it goes both ways. It's if you're instigating, if you will, I say that in quotes, others.
Right, instigating. And these are such broad general terms, totally subjective, that now anybody who's effective can be seen as the offending party.
Right. Wow, you got to talk about things in complete abstract, satirical almost ways to talk freely over there at this point. Wow. That's
right.
Crazy.
You have to satirically praise everything the administration is doing to such a way that it becomes totally ridiculous. And that's the only way that you can get away with saying it. So,
which happened it happened many times in history, but a lot in the Soviet regimes. So much so that the various institutional leaders didn't know that it was occurring. They just thought it was a great play.
Right.
When it was really a satire completely mocking them.
going straight over their heads. But in some ways, if you think about the movie American Psycho, where Christian Bale's character is just so over the top, the directors thought that they were satirizing it. But really, once you watch the movie, it's like, I kind of see what he was doing there. But, his over emotional portrayals at times, and then his totally blank face, emotionless idea was meant as a satire. And it just comes across as being someone genuinely psychotic,
Yeah,
It's good stuff. I mean,
movie.
we've got to broaden our horizon to make dissent possible. And I think a lot of people are unwilling to broaden those horizons when that type of speech is what's necessary. Is broaden it out, make those different claims, understand things in a different way, and definitely make what you say go over the heads of the ruling party, because they're not too smart. And that seems to be the hallmark of good.
Another that's a great point. And to build on that, there's a quote, dissent is patriotism. And I think people get often enough their institutions and individuals mixed up, right? Like protests are against individuals sometimes, but largely they are in powerful institutions, right? And so like protests are not made for what some criminal does. That that's not, we don't protest that, we prosecute the criminal. Protests are made for institutionalized controllers and to counter them. And I think it can have a powerful effect, but we got to understand individuals from institutions, because often enough we'll blame an individual, even one that's not an institutionalized power broker, and not look behind what is problematic. You'll find the institution if you look, but we'll often blame individuals.
I think that's the point of having billionaires,
right?
Billionaires.
They're doing it. They're like casting division between us all, except for the real polarity. Sorry.
Again, like they're in charge of all of these different institutions, supposedly in charge, when you could actually flip it and say, actually, they're the face of all of those institutions. So you're attacking the man instead of what the man is actually doing. And I think a lot of people get stuck in thinking of billionaires as being these individualists, when really they're the face of a massive institution. And that institution and how they do things sort of uses that billionaire as the scapegoat, as the face, as the sacrificial lamb of the rest of that stuff. So when you look at a billionaire, you got to see the support system behind it, because the way wealth is gathered and maintained today is not in physical things. It's in stock, right? And every stockholder is a board, right? So it's a massive institution. So Elon Musk, he's cash poor and stock rich. So he doesn't have to pay taxes on that stuff. He doesn't have to do anything, but he's beholden to those boards. So all those different companies and all those different boards are propping him up as being the face of what they want to accomplish. So in a lot of ways, if you think about what their actions are doing in relationship to the board that's sort of behind them and controlling those different ideas, that's when you get a better understanding of what that billionaire really represents.
Yeah, it makes me think of how Osho viewed democracy. He kind of said essentially that we are all slaves, and we are happy to change our masters every so often, but we're still slaves. And same thing goes with the corporation or in other institutions in format, as you just explained, that you just replace a character, but the institutional mechanics is what is really going on.
Right. And do we think that arranged marriages aren't a thing anymore? Like, since democracy, the advent of arranged marriages have, sort of diminished. But you look at who these billionaires and people are marrying, and you actually get a much better sense of the arrangements behind them.
Some spooky shit going on, and that's all suggested out of the Epstein files, even, right?
Exactly. You look at all the baby mamas of Elon.
Right.
There could be some major bonds going on there in the business spectrum that people aren't really paying attention to, because they're like, well, Elon just wants to make a bunch of kids. Yeah, look at the people that he's making kids with. Maybe that represents a more financial basis than what a lot of people give him credit for.
And I think there's a satirical movie about a president being introduced to his first lady wife by a convicted pedophile. There's some satirical movie out there. No, I'm kidding. It's reality. Supposedly, right? Supposedly Epstein introduced Melania to Trump, right? I was trying to cast blame away from me and bring that up.
Right. Some satirical movie we're living it, but with the Erica Kirk situation, where she has been given a seat on the board of advisors for the Air Force. Why? Well, Charlie Kirk was in that position before he died. So wait a second. So she's got zero qualifications to be involved in this. Maybe Charlie Kirk had zero qualifications, but they're just passing it off to a family member because there's an arrangement there. There's something going on.
It's all just, if you're in when you're in and you're not when you're not.
Back to the Bronze Age superstition.
I saw she
kind of represents the.
Sorry,
well, I was going to say she represents the Christian right wing, right? The Christian Republican right wing, and then putting her in that position. Make sure that they maintain some of that Bronze Age superstition within that institution.
It's all cult of personality. There is this inferred conspiratorial kind of conjecture on her being more intimately related to Trump for a longer period of time, right? That she was a participant in one of his beauty pageants. A long time ago.
Yes, sir. And if you go back to her grandmother and her mother were both long-time convicted criminals of scams and all sorts of other stuff. And they had these long list of marriages that they would use in a way that they could suck the resources out of the guy, create new businesses, launder the money, and then dump it all on him when they leave. So it's a very long criminality.
All these inferences and are suggestive of things, but then when you see her post, God rest the dead type of thing, poor guy died, but you see her after his death, it's obvious to me that she's faking her crying in a like exaggerated way that's just like, what are you doing? Like, she's just every 10 seconds blotting her eyes. She's not even crying,
Tammy Faye Baker. You remember that lady?
That's weird, right? Yeah.
The same sort of spiderweb eyelashes, but maybe she's just part of a family business, and that's what they do. Is they pick a guy and then they launder that money through his name and everything else, and then when it's time to move on, boom, pow, it's time to move on. You kind of get what you pay for there. And there's a lot of that going on at Trump's estate. A lot of people are hooking up with very powerful people at these events on Mar-a-Lago, where maybe it's a lot more of a one-sided connection that's being made here as opposed to genuine loving relationships. Maybe this is part of the whole Epstein thing, is being that hookup. Right. So you get to be with that guy. They've got a lot of family wealth. you can do this thing. We're going to help you with it. There's going to be some symbolic tragedy, and then you can, inherit whatever they had originally. So we can see this with the donor class. They bring these donor class in, they wine them, they dine them, and they've got this symbolic fight that they can join into. And then once they're done with you, bye-bye.
And it would be suggested and inferred if Epstein-like circles are existent in numerous kind of levels, which we can deduce that's a possibility at least, that they're literally raising these kids to in abuse and then making them do things as they become adults. It would seem as a potential.
Virginia DeFray started on Mar-a-Lago and was recruited by the Epstein network from Mar-a-Lago. Again, right? Who is doing the scouting? And scouting is a very important part of this business. They scout, they bring them in, they use them up, and then they throw them away. It's a very predatory type of thing. And we could see this over and over again with models. Models get exported to these countries where nobody speaks their language, nobody cares about them. They're surrounded, and by the time they realize it, they're already under contract. There's no way for them to escape, and they can get used in any way, shape, or form from the people who have manipulated them into those circumstances.
Yeah,
it really flips the 90s mystique on its head. How
so? What do you mean?
Well, in the 90s, we see all of these people being created and then promoted and put out there as these icons, but really, were they under contract the entire time? Maybe this is how the scouting and recruiting and use industry is sort of based. So, you've got these supermodels of the 1990s, and everybody wants to be with the supermodels. And maybe that was a created persona all along to sort of attract more flies with honey, right? Just like the cultural context, you attract more flies with honey with these good messages. I mean, what does that really equal?
It's crazy. Diddy, Trump, Epstein, Lex Wessner, whatever his name is, they're all into fashion and modeling. And the other guy, the French guy, French version of Epstein, found hanged in his cell, and probably a dozen that I'm not aware of that were intimately connected with these types and pervs. Like, how are they all getting into fashion? Just money, right? So it's like such a corrupted group.
Mirror over here is really making me think hard about Dune. Right. Have you ever seen the movie Dune? Yeah.
Sure.
So the idea in Dune is you've got the Kwisatz Haderach, which is the controlled bloodline messiah figure. And the Kwisatz Haderach is his bloodlines were being maintained through the Bene Gesserit order. And the Bene Gesserit order were like these queen slash, I guess you would call them like, what's the word I'm looking for? Not a wife, but a
consort.
Consort. Someone you don't marry, but someone who's always in the background. And so they were maintaining the bloodlines in the background using these consorts, as opposed to actually providing what these royal people wanted. So, for instance, Jessica came through House Harkonnen, right? So Jessica, being sort of like a consort to the king, right, was not supposed to bear him any daughters or any sons. And she chose to go against that because the Bene Gesserit order had such control over their own breeding that they could choose whether or not the gender of the child would be a male or a female. And so Jessica specifically went against the orders of the Bene Gesserit and gave birth to the Kwisatz Haderach, which was not supposed to happen.
This is a theme in Brave New World too, where the really like low grade workers, basically the ones that are doing all the work, are kind of, said to be happy to do so because by way of their, how they've been kind of bred, if you will. So it's
There
definitely,
could be
definitely.
that same thing going on. I mean, we don't have a good view on it, but there could be bloodlines being bred into existence as we speak, and nobody's
Well, and I
really
think
paying attention to that.
it's also like talk about the, you know, uh, breakaway culture, breakaway society that's going on potentially on the planet. I think it's maybe, maybe in some circles it is a racial thing, but I think it's, maybe a monetary thing and a control thing too, largely, right? If you're in when you have enough and you're still greedy and will play the game. It's almost like a cultural phenomenon, parasitic, elitist among any number of different groups of people, right?
Right. Well, it's these micro decisions that make the Bosque to this day that really sort of add up to a culture in the first place. And so what people don't understand is how significant those micro decisions really are in the long run, scientifically speaking. What do you have that same culture? Or is that being offset and off put by some other factor?
Yeah. Well, I can bring up what I was going to bring up today is essentially the polarity principle. Um, most everyone, I presume, is familiar with the Kybalion. And part of why my obsession of four is more so a duality of polarity rather than just as a number per se. And I'll just read this briefly. The principle of polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. This principle embodies the truth that everything is dual. Everything has two poles. Everything has its pair of opposites, all of which were old Hermetic axioms. It explains the old paradoxes that have perplexed so many, which have been stated as follows. Thesis and antithesis are identical in nature, but different in degree. Opposites are the same, differing only in degree. The pairs of opposites may be reconciled. Extremes meet. Everything is and isn't at the same time. All truths are but half truths. So it goes on, but of course, I highly recommend the Kybalion. This is in its simplicity and profundity combination. It's a great book. But I only look at it this way post my obsession with four. But I think there are. Wait, let's go back to that one second.
Oh, sure.
There's two. There's a polarity of different ways to look at what is being said here in one sense, and I'm jumping to a subjective approach here. I realize that, but keep in mind, as we see here, actually, this is the fourth principle of the Kybalion, not the second, right? So this is the heart chakra would be similar in correspondence. There's another Kybalion tenet. The fourth chakra is the heart chakra, which is very dualistic, if you will. It pumps in, it pumps out.
Right.
It's bringing in and out, and it's creating the oxygenation and the blood flow, so on and so forth, or helping that propel through. But the idea here, essentially, that I'm postulating, everything has poles. Does that mean that poles have poles? Right? If everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has its pair of opposites. So do opposites have their pair of opposites? Like and unlike are the same. It's a very yin yang kind of craziness, essentially. But as with the yin yang, that's often noted to be two extremes. They actually are mutually dependent and co-arising, and they have two extremes with an extreme within each other as well, right? So it's kind of this. You could look at it as a fractal polarity within it, even too, which brings about the idea from which the Bagua kind of arises. It's the Wuji, which is the nothing, and then there is the separation of the nothingness into 2 parts and 4 parts, and the 8 trigrams of the Bagua, and then the myriad things. And I'm not expressing this as poetically as some Taoist sages, but this is kind of a primary understanding. So I understand that there's the duality, I think, that people will take to heart out of this lesson, but I find that's a really limiting kind of even a philosophical perceptive kind of outlook that will obscure things rather than reveal them. When things get polarized, they are limited, right? If they're only polarized and then period, that's it, it becomes a limiting perspective. Whereas if you start to look at the contrasts with contrasts, then you start to unfold these different potentials and maybe even break your own assumptions and prejudices, which are, the main thing we have to kind of reconcile when we're processing and trying to elevate a solution to a problem or observation and conversation and so on. So the dual, the quadratic kind of contrasting, I think, is a great tool. And this is kind of why I use the moniker of the 4th initiate, whereas the Kybalion is the author is the 3 initiates. My obsession with 4 and building off of this duality into a duality of polarity, I so ostentatiously took on that.
Right. Well, I see all truths are but half truths. And I think about the inner and outer world, the subjective and the objective. So you could be reading the words on the page, but it's within your subjective world that meaning comes about. So that meaning is that half truth, because half of it is coming from the outside and the other half is coming from your inner world and how your inner world perceives that outside truth. That's I think that, is that a duality of polarity? Is that making the 4?
It reminds me of the idea of a doorway between the esoteric and the exoteric, and should you view the esoteric in one way, probably should start with the contrast of it to really start to perceive it, right? You can't understand what's good without the bad, or the light without the dark. Same thing with outside of the door, with the exoteric. You you should maybe start with a contrast, or it is at least a good starting point.
Right. I think far too often we're kind of fooled by adjectives. Somebody else describing a thing seems to be the objective truth of things, when that description is just their inner world manifesting itself onto the outer world. So I could say, well, this is green, right? But there's actually a lot more to it than just the green, right? So if I'm writing this down on a page and I say this is green, well, it's got some gold in there. It's got some flecks of metal that make it reflective. There's a lot more to it than just the green. And we're being fooled by that adjective because it's only being flavored by my own inner life, which just tells me to say green. There's a lot more to it than just the subjective reality that I'm putting out on a page, So when you start reading a bunch of flowery adjectives, you have to understand that that's a person trying to influence your inner world instead of maybe the objective truth of it. And add-ons and additions. Once you start to identify add-ons and additions within a piece of writing, where this is the basic idea, and then this was added on top of it, right? And then this was added on top of it. When you can start to identify those, you can get to the truth of the meaning. But again, exoteric versus esoteric interpretation. So the exoteric would be all of the flowery adjectives, but the inside is something very different. And what we often find is that flavoring stuff too much ruins the dish. And so all of these adjectives, Trump's a great example of just adding adjectives where none are necessary. It's going to be huge. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be the best ever. And it's like,
biggest
okay.
Ever. It's always the ultimate exaggeration. It's so constant.
There's never been anything like this. This is going to be the best. And really, what is
biggest,
it?
Biggest attack in the Middle East. This is the biggest attack in the Middle East, he said recently.
It's just insane. It's, but a lot of people fall for it because they're imbued with those adjectives. They are changed by those adjectives. They are, transformed by the baptism of adjectives.
I think Trump uses dark neurolinguistic programming, and the exaggeration is a big factor that he uses. And it's not just exaggeration. It's like pinnacle exaggeration, biggest in history, biggest ever. It's always smartest ever, all these things. It's like, it's so ridiculous, like on so many levels often, but it's like he just keeps on going with the exaggeration.
See, I think that's the major failure of Back to the Future Part 2, is that their Biff Tannen character, who's supposed to be like a reflection of Trump, he didn't use enough flowery adjectives. He was too blunt. He should have been saying, this is, you want to take down the best casino that's ever existed. That would be a lot more true to life if they were really going for a depiction of Trump,
That's all. That's a really interesting rabbit hole. The Back to the Future. I don't know what to call it, but the time distortion within the movie, anyway, is just weird.
Oh, it gets so much worse when you go into Michael J. Fox's later work. So he had this one show about City Hall in New York, and then Doc Brown shows up as God in that show. Right. And so you've got this contrast between time travel and, Back to the Future and then God, right? And so when you think about it, like a person who can time travel, who can plant the seeds that come to fruition at a later time point in the future, they become like a god, right? Because they're no longer bound by mortality. And one of the defining features of the gods is this immortal state. And so when you can travel through time without feeling the effects of it, you become like a god, because that immortality nature starts to manifest in multiple ways over multiple timelines. Most of the time, we only view the idea of time travel from the protagonist perspective, the one who's doing the time traveling. But to the people around that time traveler, whether in the past or the present or the future, it seems to you like they are a god, because now they have a power that nobody else can master, and they have the ability to change events deep into the past and shape events in the future. So the idea of time traveling God, I think, are really intricately linked.
Yeah, it's all fascinating. I don't know what to think of any of these possibilities. Like, you know, after seeing the Epstein files and other tangential reports, stories,
Oof.
information, it's like, yeah, have they been occultists, or not occultists? That gives actual occultists a bad name, but like cults that have been in possession of high technology, including time travel. Like, it's a legitimate question now. I mean, maybe it always.
That actually goes back to the Erica Kirk thing. So she went to Tesseract School, which was part of Tesseract School.
Crazy.
She went there as a child, which was very odd. And that school was actually inside of a Hebrew school that was the Hebrew word for looking glass. And so looking glass, Tesseract School, and somehow she's involved with it. But, you know, I also realized we were doing that episode with the guy who was talking about the Epstein files, and I was talking to Nick while that was going on. You know, time travel is a perfect way to abuse children, because if they think that time doesn't matter because they're time traveling, or that, you know, these events in the past were changed or altered in some way, they're less likely to spill the beans to somebody who might actually care about them. So the idea of time travel and child abuse using psychological torment hasn't been fully explored, but, you know, we've got all of these other books like Peter Pan and let's say, what's the one with the Pinocchio, and all of these other stories that have been used in a lot of child training and child grooming, that now, you know, let's say add a little time travel to the mix. Alice in Wonderland, all the rest of these sort of grooming books, add some time travel in there, and you got yourself a potent combination of psychological control and torture.
Yeah, I can't put anything at this point.
Well, I think what we live in is this milieu of narratives, right? And these narratives have a cultural quality to them, and they, you know, change the nature of culture. This kind of goes back to offsetting a native culture. Is you inject certain narratives into those societies, and you understand how to use those narratives. The people who are absorbing them aren't really understanding your methodology or your purpose or your goals. So those narratives then can take on a different, more sinister shape based upon the people who have injected them. And when that can be examined fully from the perspective of the person, you know, doing the narrative abuse, you can kind of see how we get governments in the first place. You can kind of see how we get religions in the first place. You can see how all that stuff could come about once you understand that narrative abuse. Like we were talking about last week, the narrative arc, it applies to absolutely everything. And if you can start to manipulate your own narrative arc, then you can become more powerful. If you can manipulate other people's narrative arc, you can disempower them.
And how many times has that happened to us in our lifetime? And how many times has that happened to humanity over generations?
Right. And Mirror here is saying Trump's skill is primarily as an illusionist. Well, this is my definition of magic. Are you ready?
Can't argue.
Magic is an illusion used to influence reality. This applies to all forms of magic, not just prestidigitation, not just ceremonial magic. You're creating an illusion to either influence your inner world, your outer world, or a combination of the two. You've created that illusion to start a narrative, and a narrative is kind of illusionary in itself. to influence the outside world. So understanding the nature of magic itself is understanding the nature of story, is understanding narrative, all the rest of these things.
Speaking of, I have a video I want to share of
Sure.
what was it reminds me anyway. I wasn't planning on sharing this, but it reminds me of a video I just saw on Reddit that just got released. Okay, I found it. And I won't share. I won't tell you what it is. I'll just surprise everybody.
All right.
So let's see. It's on Reddit, so it probably shouldn't cause any problems. Here. Excuse me for being slow.
That's fine.
Okay. Everyone will know where this is and what it is. I guarantee it. Here we are. Oh, where'd the sound go?
The pause.
President's been shot. Oh no. No. Either that or they're covering. We don't know. Either that or they're covering him. We love you. We love you, President Trump.
We love you.
We love
Wow. Oh, who's that guy?
We love you. Yes. 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 We love you, President Trump. No. Oh, no, he's shot.
Talk about creating a narrative potentially. I mean, that all seemed highly dubious to me.
Well, how many film directors did President Trump have in his staff? And what you'll find is a lot of film directors were right there, making these narratives happen. And so, in a lot of times, unless you dig in,
like they lowered the flag. Like what? Who
I don't
was
know
told
about that.
It
That could have been the wind.
I don't know either. It seemed to be anyway that they lowered the flag, which could have been maybe like whoever was. Why is someone in that crane? I don't know, but whoever was in the crane thought maybe I'll cover the president or make a distraction or something. It's possible. I'm just exploring possibilities. But it all looked very dubious.
That's probably a perspective error because there's a lot more wind going on, and maybe the wind died down for a second, and that's the perfect place to get those shots.
Can't rule that out either.
Because I remember seeing that flag all throughout the thing, but once that wind died down, that's the perfect time to get those pictures and slap it on the front of everything. And isn't it funny how quickly all of that disappeared? It was just sort of like, oh, he got shot. We got to find the killers. And then it's like, well, what killers? We got the guy. Everything's cool. Don't look into it. We're done. It's just such a stage.
So strange.
Exit stage left.
Yeah. And the fact that the kid was on a roof in full view of there was a Fed sniper right there watching him the whole time. It would seem to me that he could have been watching him the whole time anyway. The guy that actually shot him ultimately presumably was just watching him the whole time, you would think.
All truths are but half truths.
Nailing it. It all comes back together.
Right. And if we keep engaging in that type of narrative play for ourselves, what chance do we have of ever achieving the kind of sovereignty that is necessary? I mean, one of the reasons I bring up the Bosque is because they don't make waves. They're not trying to make narratives for other people. They're not trying to take over the world. You know, they want to preserve what they have. And that's a lot different than empire building. You know, they've been sort of at war with the outside world for a long ass time. And if you want to go back to the Bell Beaker people, like that's the one of the origin points. Bell Beaker people were all over Europe. What if they were all speaking Basque at one point? You know, and then they all consolidated down into this one little area as this cultural diffusion took place and all of these other cultures moved in. So what they're trying to preserve could be a lot more real than just songs. You know, could be a lot more real than just the way that they make boats. And by honoring those roots, they maintain a cultural connection to the future. You know, you can't really have a future if your roots have been cut out from under you. You become sort of a dupe, you know, to whoever's trying to profit off of your displacement. And one example of that, have you ever heard of Texas German?
No, I don't think so.
Right. There's a reason for that. So I could show you a quick video about it. 2 commercials, 3 commercials, 4 commercials. All right.
Well,
So let me share
shared us
this.
all, so that's great.
What's that? Yeah.
said you
No, I try
shared us.
to I try to save those commercials just for me. That's just for me, guys. You don't get those commercials. All right. So this is Texas German. Let me, there it is. There's my tab. Play.
Und ich kann mich nicht erinnern, wo ich nicht beide Sprachen kann, Deutsch und Englisch. Ich habe es zur selben Zeit gelernt. Und dann bin ich 3 Jahre nach einer Country-Schule gegangen. Und dann haben sie uns nach die Stadt geschickt. Und so habe ich dann fertig gemacht bei Friedrichsburg. Und ich bin hier in die Schule fertig gemacht und in die Hochschule. Und dann habe ich in die Stadt gearbeitet und dann für 3 Jahre und dann habe ich mich verheiratet. Und mein Mann und ich, wir hoffen, bis nächsten Monat sind wir 57 Jahre verheiratet. Und wir haben immer draußen aufs Land gewohnt. Wir haben noch nie in die Stadt gewohnt. Und
we had 3 children, but they don't speak German. So Texas German is a going extinct dialect. The youngest speaker of Texas German is 60 years old. But if you know about German geography, you know about Schlitterbahn, you know about Fredericksburg. These were huge German settlements in Texas. And actually, these German settlements went all the way across the Midwest. And you've got places like Germantown in so many different states, German this, German that. They banned the speaking of German in 1918 when they started World War II. They said, you cannot speak German anymore. And so the youngest speakers are the ones who were illegally speaking German in the United States as they were the ones who settled here. So this is a dialect that is now going extinct. So you might be some of the last people to hear this dialect spoken.
3 Kinder gehabt, aber die sprechen kein Deutsch. Weil da waren, die Kinder hatten und die klein waren, haben wir nicht hier bei Friedrichsburg gewohnt. So haben die anderen Kinder, was die gekannt haben, die haben kein Deutsch gesprochen. So haben unsere Kinder das auch nicht gelernt. Und die sind dann auch alle gezogen jetzt nach anderen Plätzen, weil hier ist nicht viel Arbeit bei Friedrichsburg. So sind die alle weitergegangen und sind auch nach College gegangen und haben alle arbeiten jetzt in die Städte, wo sie mehr Geld machen können. Und so mein Mann und ich, wir haben immer draußen auf der Ranch gewohnt. Mein Mann hat für andere Leute gearbeitet, wo größere Stücken Land hatten. Und so haben wir Schaf und Ziehen und Vieh gezogen. Und wir haben immer noch Rambly, Schaf, die was man scheren tut. Und haben jetzt auch Ziegen was gerade bloß für Fleisch sind. Wir haben sonst die Angora-Ziegen gehabt, aber da ist jetzt nicht mehr viel Geld rein. So haben wir jetzt Ziegen, was gerade bloß für Borgziegen heißen die, und die sind gerade bloß für Fleisch. Und weil, wo die Kinder klein waren, war ich immer zu Hause mit den Kindern. Und dann, wo die etwas größer waren, dann habe ich verschiedene Plätze in die Stadt gearbeitet. Und ich arbeite jetzt bei dem Pioneer Museum. Und weil das ist, die haben hier die Geschichte von Friedrichsburg. Und so, wenn Leute kommen, dann nehme ich.
So yeah, I just wanted to show a little bit of that because the cultural restoration process is not an easy one. It takes work, and it takes understanding that, as you can see, all of her kids moved off to college. They never spoke German. They did it for more money, right? And so
Sure.
these cultures that go back thousands and thousands of years are dying off for more money. More money in the big city.
It reminds me that just like Germans took over the royal family of England, German, the language, is really the father language of English. It's really you can't an English speaker can't read it. He ain't gonna do that. But if you spend time in German around German speakers, you will be able to understand it. As that kind of video even showed.
Right. But all of these things are part of a heritage that goes back thousands of years, that has the ability to expand your mind and think more like your ancestors, right? And your ancestors survived in some of the harshest conditions imaginable. And when you don't have those roots, and when you don't have the ability to see the world in the same way, language shapes the mind, right? And when you're no longer having that cultural shaping, it becomes a lot easier for people to impose those conditions on you so that they can make maximum profit from your labor. And we kind of see where that leads us today. It's not really a good place. And
well, it's this is related, but it's interesting now with technology. There'll be a slang term that will pop up, and within like 10 days at the most, the whole world knows it. Like recently we see 6-7. Like everybody knows this term and is seeing it before anyone even knew what it meant and how to use it. That still is meaningless. But my point really is like it was boom, just wildfire. Whereas like slang used to like, it would, start in New York or start in California or other places, but predominantly, and it would kind of move across the country in a slow way, or from wherever it started, it would kind of move as people do. And now it's the internet. It's like that shit is just everywhere over a couple of days.
Right.
And it's often enough, these they're not necessarily even good things. They're hollow things being promoted in that manner. But I guess some things over time are higher minded that might be more widely distributed. But like it's just crazy how instantly now just boom, culture shifts can just be so rapid.
1830s. They had a trend in Boston and New York of writing weird, bizarre, funny letters using disconnected spellings to words that were otherwise used, right? One of them was writing all correct using an O and a K for the beginning of all and correct. And so it got shortened down to OK, which is a neutral positive, right? How are things going? Okay. Neutral positive. You're not saying everything's great. You're not saying everything's bad. But OK comes from a bizarre spelling of the words all correct in the first usage. So how did that trend take hold? How did that language take off? Well, it was useful, right? And what is 6-7 useful for? Just having a laugh, having a quick chuckle, but it's probably not going to stick around in the same way because it doesn't have that same use case. And so, language, if it's not connected to people, places, things, and activities, doesn't really have a purpose. So it's funny how quickly these trends come and go when they don't have a use case.
I just learned of another one that's it has a particular use, but it started off with some obscure or contemporary, what was then contemporary fiction, I believe. It was a story of three brothers from Taipan, in what was then probably Taiwan area, or no, so the islands near the Philippines, somewhere down there. I forget exactly where it was, but these three brothers would have all these great coincidences occur in a town that was called Saran, and that's where we get the term serendipity. I would have thought it was like a Latin or some other obscure, origin, but no, it was just a novel about these three brothers of Saran that kind of had good coincidences, and now we have serendipity,
which is interesting. I mean, all of these things have interesting origin, and a lot of people are unaware of those origins. Like providence and serendipity sort of have this dual kind of connected meaning, that now providence is sort of on the outs and serendipity is kind of on the in, but they kind of mean the same thing. It's interesting how those things arise. But what do you think?
One more thing that's interesting. Anyway, that's contemporary. Jug the Goat brings up: didn't Teddy Roosevelt try to change change spelling in certain words? That I'm not aware of, but it's interesting that some of the greatest euphemisms are in headless, better than I do, in the military and the results of war and pertaining to war. And it used to be that, even the institution that frameworked war in the United States was euphemistic in itself, Department of Defense. And they named it that after it was originally called the Department War for that very reason, right? And of course, serious injuries in war or even death is a casualty, which is it casual? No, not at all. Or what happened? There was an engagement. Like, what? You mean a bunch of people killed each other? Yeah, that's what it was.
And it's an engagement with the infantry, right? We're starting to see a trend.
Yeah, right. God, that's so dark, right?
Well, not really. I mean, what does war do? It selects for the strongest warriors. The strongest warriors make it home. And those are the people that you want to have children. So in the naval conflicts, in the infantry, right, you've got these different ideas of birth being included with these ideas of death. And so this is sort of like a eugenical process of how does the strongest survive? Well,
and
it's by surviving in war.
A big part of training for war is to be broken down so you get rid of all these things. So you actually kind of like look at that word in an esoteric sense. You got to be an infant minded, and then we'll order you and grow you from there.
Right. But there's such power to the language that speaks to our subconscious mind. Sure. Slick is always doing that. Slick understands that. Slick Dissident, if you haven't checked out his channel, go check him out. He's always trying to make those connections between language, the subconscious mind, and the events around us. So, yeah, it's very interesting.
English being this amalgamation and almost designed language, you can really see it unfold with English, especially.
Right. And what if those silent letters are more indicative of the origin of the language itself than a lot of people give it credit for? So you can kind of look at Middle English, right? Middle English, Low English, all of these other ones had silent letters. I was on Gods of the Morning Wood, where they just have these J's and weird letters in locations that makes it almost unreadable, because you've got to make the switch in your head for what it's sounding like instead of what we know of it today. So there's a lot of that going on, where you've got the ideas of where things fall in their order, in their roles. And if you don't understand that, you're just going to essentially be at the whims of whoever knows it and uses it on you. So everything's a spell, since illusion is used to influence reality in such a way.
Yep, well said.
Well, what do you think? This has been a good trialogue. We're missing out on Ricardo. Hopefully he comes in next week, but I think he's doing important work up there.
Are you guys going to plan to meet each other?
At some point, if the snow ever gets cleared. It's a lot of snow.
Right. Yeah.
It's a lot of snow, but I'd like to go out and see him sometime. He's in Wisconsin right now. He's around the Devil's Lake area up north of Madison, which is about 2 hours away from me. So hopefully we can meet up at some point. But if the weather holds,
make a video for us when you meet.
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be an awesome thing. Maybe do promos for the trialogues and stuff. But yeah, guys, if you don't know, go over and check out his site, Ricardo Calvario, the Natural Philosophy Institute. He's going to be coming out with a lot more articles and a lot more important stuff, because he's talking to the natives right now about their ancient stories about that float copper. Maybe there's some corroborative evidence that hasn't been examined from the oral histories that would help out his case, I think. So definitely big things are coming in that regards. And if you guys are passionate about understanding float copper in Michigan, it's a good time to be aware of that, because he's working his butt off trying to make that happen. And that changes the entire landscape of what we understand about our world. And it becomes really hard to argue against it when you know about the actual quantities of the stuff being mined. And it's time for that Pandora's box to come broken wide open. Let's get into it. That's how we grow. So thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you again on another trialogue next week. See you later.
Peace.